Meanwhile, British Petroleum continues to work on a solution to contain the spill. Joining me now from New York, Sylvia Earle, the oceanographer, now at National Geographic, author of The World is Blue, How Our Fate in the Oceans Are One. Jim Tripp of the Environmental Defense Fund. From Houston, John Hofmeister, founder of Citizens for Affordable Energy and former president of Shell Oil Company and author of the upcoming book, Why We Hate the Oil Companies, Straight Talk from an Energy Insider. From Purdue University, Stephen Wehrle, an associate professor of mechanical engineering. I'm pleased to have all of them here to talk about this catastrophe in the Gulf. John Hofmeister, what do you think about these estimates?
Well, I'm not the mathematician, Charlie, that I wish I was, but the input to the pipe is about a 6-inch entrance at the reservoir. We're talking about tubular pipes here that get smaller as the well gets deeper. So the entrance into the pipe at the base of the reservoir is only about 6 inches wide. And so I'm not sure how the oil flows from there, except that obviously it's flowing. So I don't think I'm an expert on the mathematics of it.
BP said today that it would not focus on measuring the leak because, A, there's no way to measure it. An estimate of the flow rate would not change the direction or the scale of their response. Do they have a point?
When you're managing a crisis, and you know, the oil industry and any hydrocarbon-based industry does have crises, as we know. When you're managing the crisis, the first thing you try to do is get to stem the flow. That is where all of the focus is. The cleanup will happen as a progressive set of activities as and when they get to it, and they're obviously getting to it now. But the real issue is putting all of their engineering, all of their resources into stopping the flow and going through a plan A, plan B, plan C, etc., of how in fact that can take place. And what I see from my just observing is they have a very good crisis plan. They've got a team of competent, capable people, very large, bringing in all kinds of experts from around the world to try to help with this, to look at it from every scientific, every engineering, every geological, every mathematical equation so that they can engineer a fix, which is their primary duty and responsibility.
John, what do you make of this? Not so much whether they should have contacted them, but this difference in size of spill, and its impact.
Yeah, I think if it was actually at that large amount, we would be seeing considerably more ocean space being taken up. And the armada that they've put together to try to contain the spill would be overwhelmed. So I'm not sure I agree with that larger number. Don't know what the number actually is, but if it's, let's say it's in the 5,000 range, the issue for an oil company is to go and stop the leak. That is fundamental. That is what everybody is concentrating on. I agree that the damage to the sea is horrific. I agree that the dispersants are very questionable in terms of whether they do more or less damage. I think they do, perhaps over time, more damage. And we need to find better ways to mop that up. I think we could spread biomass on the spill, such as peat moss, chips, any kind of biomass, straw, and then have an easier job of skimming it and collecting it. And I've been on, talking about a huge Saudi spill that happened in the early 90s where they used super tankers in formation to pull in the seawater with the oil in massive quantities, offload the super tankers, put them back out there to collect more oil. That was a spill far larger than anything the U.S. has ever experienced. So, but I think the remediation, it takes an armada of ships, it takes lots and lots of people. They're managing some 13,000 people in the cleanup process. That's a huge undertaking. In addition to that, I think if you don't have these remedies down at the bottom of the sea, you're really stuck. Because whether it's 5 or 75, you're really stuck until you shut off the flow.
So give me some assessment of what you think that has been done so far.
Well, I think when you have a crisis plan and you think about these things all the time, you have the easy to do, the not so easy to do, and the technically very challenging remedies that you can go through. While you have a crisis plan for spills inside an energy company, an oil company, you have to realize that every spill takes on its own peculiarities, its own personality, if you will. In this case, 5,000 feet deep. 30,000 some wells drilled in the Gulf of Mexico. This has never happened in 40 years. So this is a new learning for this kind of depth, to have a blowout at this depth where the blowout preventer didn't work for reasons we'll find out eventually. The amount coming out is huge. It's very large. But you're dealing with pressures and temperatures in terms of whatever you're engineering, that you'd better get it right. So the engineering work that takes place at 5,000 feet below the sea level is different than what you might do at, say, 1,500 or 1,000 feet below sea level, because the pressures are so huge. And you can't make mistakes. You're dealing with robots, so you're doing everything from a distance. You're doing everything by essentially touch and feel with a joystick. So you do take the steps. They started with the big 70-foot tall, what they called, I call it a chimney stack, and that didn't work. It started to float upwards to the surface with the gas hydrates, because they made it lighter than water. They have a top hat sitting there waiting to see if they're going to use it. They haven't decided to use it yet. They have an insertion, a pipe insertion method they're getting ready to deploy, where they could possibly, ultimately start pulling the oil up in a direction where a top hat might make more sense, where they could enter methanol and whatnot to avoid the hydrates. They also have the trash model, which was used in the Kuwait in the Kuwait explosions in the first Kuwait War, where you start throwing trash into the well and eventually clog it up. It may sound primitive, it may sound ridiculous to people that say, well, this is a high-tech industry. But in fact, trash works. And so you're going to try everything that works. And ultimately, you're drilling the relief well, which is fail-safe.
John, what's the argument for offshore drilling?
There's an interesting perspective, Charlie, that never gets talked about. As we moved into the deep water and the ultra-deep water, everyone in the industry knew that it was going to raise the risks of drilling and the consequences of those risks. Then you might ask yourself, well, why is the industry going into the deep water and the ultra-deep water? Well, for 30 years, this nation had a policy of prohibiting offshore drilling off of our coasts on the West Coast and the East Coast. 85% of the outer continental shelf was off limits for shallow drilling. So the industry went where the oil is. In addition, there's lots of oil on land that the industry is not allowed to pursue based on federal regulation. Can't get permits. There's a whole world of the Colorado oil shale that's not getting developed. So where there is conventional oil and unconventional oil that is much less risky to go after, the industry basically either didn't drill or it moved into more risky occupations, or reservoirs, I should say. And so what we haven't had is a comprehensive energy plan for this nation to either develop hydrocarbons, move away from hydrocarbons, develop other sources of power, other technologies for mobility. We're really missing the boat as a nation by politicizing energy, by allowing partisan politics to turn energy into an ideological conversation, and we're simply not managing our own future. It's time to manage our own future. It's nuts what we're doing. And because we've waited so long, I think we're headed for an energy abyss within a decade, because we're simply not producing enough energy for the future of this country.
So what would you tell President Obama to do?
I would tell him that it's time, number one, to get energy and politics separated. You can't have two-year election cycles with 26 congressional committees deciding our energy future. You can't have four-year presidents deciding our future when we have decades where decisions have to be implemented, not reversed. But we've had zigzag politics. We've had structural government dysfunction in trying to manage energy. And my solution, my recommendation, when our monetary system was in collapse in the 19th century and early 20th century, we created an independent regulatory agency called the Fed to get rid of the politics of the monetary system. I think it's time to put an independent regulatory agency in charge of energy and the environment to set politics aside and get on with doing what this society needs, which is more energy and a cleaner environment, and get it out of politics.
The Kerry Lieberman bill, is this, even though it's not perfect, a good first step?
I think it's better than what we have now, obviously, and I do believe that carbon regulation is essential for the future of our energy system. How we go about it is a matter of debate and discussion. I've been in favor of a cap-and-trade mechanism for many years. I think it's in there in a way that it could work. The only difficulty I have with the Kerry Lieberman bill thus far, and I like a lot of what's in it, and I had the opportunity to talk directly with Senator Kerry about it, and I know this man has worked so hard. He has done a national service to all of us. But what's missing is the supply side of energy. And we really have to concentrate on what is the mix of energy in the future. And this is where the independent regulatory agency could both guide the mix of future energy from hydrocarbons to nuclear to renewables to geothermal and hydrogen and so on, and then what's the impact on the environment relative to that mix. I think simply throwing legislation into today's mix of energy ends up being punitive and very costly and creates enemies. So I think we need a more holistic approach that takes technology for efficiency, energy for more supply, the management of our wastes, and the development of our infrastructure into account all at the same time. I've never seen a bill do that. I don't think the legislative process lends itself to that. I think the regulatory process, especially if it's independent, would lend itself to that solution.
I have to leave it there. So my thanks to John Hofmeister, my thanks to Jim Tripp and Sylvia Earle. It's always great to have you here. Back in a moment. Stay with us.